Welcome to Dealing in Absolutes, where we discuss anything and everything that is Star Wars from a certain point of view. I am Danny, and with me, as always, is the reasoning to my rambling, Brian, my co-host. How are you today, Brian? And are you ready to join the rebellion?
I am ready. I'm not only ready to join the rebellion, you could say that I'm a Fandor.
Oh, I like that. Then we're going to
I'm
just move
so
on
sorry.
with the Fandors. I say that join the rebellion because that's apparently been the go-to marketing campaign for Andor. Isn't it nice to see marketing for a TV show? You know, like where was that for Skeleton Crew? Or Skeleton Crew, left on its own. But you know what? We're not talking about Skeleton Crew this time around. We're talking about Andor. So we're going to start off this show by just kind of going back and reflecting upon season 1 of Andor. Our thoughts, where we think they can go, the pluses, the ups, the downs, and everything else. When we left off in Andor, there was a big old riot in Ferrix. So you had everybody in Ferrix revolting against the Empire, finally having enough of the Empire. It ended with Bix, Brasso, B2, Emo is what I'm calling him, because he's always just so sad. And then Wilmond and escaping with the Daughters of Ferrix. Then you had a Syril saving his mentor, love interest, Dedra, and then you had
those are two ways to put it. Yes.
And then you had Cassian finally confronting Luthen with, "Bro, why are you trying to kill me? Like, what are we doing? What's going on here?" So he gave him the ultimatum: either kill me now or bring me with you. And then that is how season 1 ended, taking us into the long wait for season 2. So initial thoughts, Brian, where are we going with this?
So I have to say that season 1 of Andor is probably my favorite thing that Disney has done under the Star Wars umbrella, right? Overall. And just generally one of the best television shows of the last 10 years. I think we're going to see a lot more exploration into the Empire. We're going to see a lot more exploration into the early days of the rebellion, because we know from Rogue One that that's where this is all leading to. And then we're also just going to see more exploration into Andor as a character, and we'll get into that. And he is a sort of central mystery that may or may not actually be that important. They introduced it early on in season 1, and then we didn't really hear from it for like 5 or 6 episodes. But it's really great. But I think this sets up a question that I want to ask you, and it's one I've been thinking about a lot, which is, does this have to be a Star Wars show, or did this have to be a Star Wars show? Because rewatching some of the episodes, there are hardly any aliens in this show. I think there are like 3 in the entire season, and 2 of them are standing together. There's no Jedi. I don't think we see a stormtrooper until maybe the 2nd or 3rd episode on the Aldhani story arc, right?
Yep.
We hear nothing about the Emperor. We hear absolutely nothing about Luke. There's no Skywalkers to be seen, no Solos to be seen. In many ways, this is not very Star Wars-y in that it doesn't tie to the overall Skywalker saga story arc / stories of the Jedi and the Force. But I would argue it is very Star Wars-y in a way, even though it lacks all those things. What do we think?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because when you initially had brought up the question to me, the first thing I thought of was just kind of reflecting back onto what I'm watching currently, like on my just vast majority of platforms from all 8,000 apps that might as well just have cable by now, because I have like every single app known to man. And I'm just like running through all the shows that my wife and I have just recently watched. And it's everything from, like, you think of Severance to Paradise to Handmaid's Tale to Westworld to Game of Thrones, like just thinking about like these big monumental shows that have just had such an impact on like pop culture and just like people's like, oh, like this really resonates with us. And it is that whole, I don't really know how to approach it, or just kind of, I don't want to condense it into just like, oh, it's this story, because every story is so different. Every approach is so different. But overall, it is that just story of just like the like the individual or the group of people trying to break out of this overreach of authoritarian like rule. There's one thing about having an overarching like government or something like that, yeah, like somebody setting the rules into place, but then there's that overreach. There's that controlling people's lives that's underneath you and just kind of like taking away their rights and taking away things that make them who they are. And we see that a lot throughout all of these shows, and that resonates with people just because they put themselves in these characters' positions. And I think that's what's really strong about Andor, that it's such a grounded show in that sense where it's like, okay, there are no aliens, there are no Jedi, there are no Sith. It's just this guy. And with you can say he's just a string of bad luck, or he's just running into the results of the decisions he makes. Because, you know, Cassian's not necessarily like the most clean cut guy. Like when we first introduced him, he's kind of like that smuggler type, not necessarily like smuggler as in like transporting like whatever it is that he's transporting, but just his actions is very like Han Solo, like rogue, not to, you know, no pun intended, but rogue type character where he's just trying to get by, like scraping through and just making those little deals that just get him like moving forward. And then within that whole realm of like the Empire looking over everything and restricting things, he just ends up being pulled into that situation that the rest of the world is currently dealing with. And he's been able to like go around it so far. And it's just that like simple story that just makes it more interesting and helps people like bring you into it. Like there's with a lot of other Star Wars shows, there is that question of like, oh, well, what do I have to look at before I come here? Like, do I have to watch this show? Do I have to watch this show? Actually, a friend of mine had reached out before I watch Andor 2. Like, is there something else that I have to watch? Like, well, Andor season 1, but like, that's about it. It's just about some dude and his friends trying to get the hell out of what the situation that the world has overtaken them with. And that's what's kind of resonating with that show. So I don't think it needs to be a Star Wars show to be successful. I think it's successful within the Star Wars community because of how serious it takes the material and how it moves that forward. Because we always do see the Empire lingering over, but we see it more from the perspective of like the Jedi and then the Sith and the bigger like battle. This kind of takes you more to like a central, like, okay, we haven't really seen this aspect of the whole battle between the Empire and the Alliance and like what the regular people from day to day are seeing and how it's affecting them. So in that sense, like, I think that takes this show like just above and beyond, because you could have this show without making it Star Wars. And I think a big contribution to what you had said about you don't see a lot of aliens, you don't see a lot of stormtroopers, you don't see a lot of that sort of stuff, kind of comes from like Tony Gilroy's like first approach into this. Like where, and if you pay attention to like a lot of, I've been watching a lot of the interviews that he's done, and then you kind of like backtrack it back to like when he was first being interviewed for Rogue One and that sort of stuff. And it's almost been like a shift where it's more like, oh, I'm doing this movie, not because I like Star Wars, but because like, you know, like I think like I can do something with it, like I can do something different. Like he's not a big like Star Wars Legends guy or a big, and not to speak for him, maybe he is, but maybe he just doesn't want to portray that as a fanboy. It's more of like a project to him that he feels like he can use his creativity to do something different with compared to what he's talking about now. And he does bring up things like continuity or things as if far of like what's in canon. And I've been picking up those little like breadcrumbs that he's been throwing out there about like, okay, like now that he's been stuck in Star Wars, for lack of a better phrase, for more than 10 years now, like he's grown to appreciate it and like really like bring out those Star Wars elements. I think we're going to see a lot more of that in season 2.
No, I'm glad you said all that, and I agree. I think he wanted to make a show about authoritarianism in space, and Star Wars just happened to be sort of the best vehicle and the best universe to tell that story in, right? And he wanted to show like what is authoritarianism like on a day-to-day basis. And it made me think a lot about the original films. And if we go through the original films and we go through the planets in there, we don't really see what the Empire is like on a day-to-day basis. The only place we really get that is Tatooine. But the whole purpose of Tatooine is that it's this remote planet at the edge of the galaxy. There are stormtroopers there, but I always kind of got the vibe that that was fairly uncommon, that there just weren't a lot of stormtroopers around most of the time, that the Hutts and the local crime lords and, you know what I mean, the farmers sort of ran things on a day-to-day basis, and that the stormtroopers were only there to look for the escape pod and to find the droids. So we don't really get a sense of like the tyranny of the empire, what it's like. And in that way, I think it's very different because we don't really, obviously, we don't get that in the prequels because we get a sense of what it's like living under the Trade Federation. We get a sense of what it's living like under the Republic. And then we have a sense of living like what it's like under the First Order. But it's crazy that, we're 20, 30 years into Star Wars and someone had the idea of like, what is it like to be an everyday citizen living under the Empire? And that's really what Ferrix is, in showing in detail what it's like to live under this regime where you don't have any rights, where you don't have any liberties, where they exploit people. Like, you really get the sense that this is an empire. It's imperial. I think there was a line in the Aldhani story arc where they talk about that they give alcohol to the locals in order to destroy the local Aldhani culture. And it sort of speaks back to the stuff like, 200 years ago that the British and the French and the European powers used to do when they were imperial, right? It's imperial in the truest sense of the word. And with that, there's also elements of moral ambiguity, because even though that this is kind of a righteous cause here, we have some very sympathetic villains and we also have some very unsympathetic heroes. Even though this is very much like a two-way fight, there's camps and factions within both sides. And that feels like a really good way for us to talk about some, first, let's talk about, I guess, the sympathetic villains, Dedra and Syril.
Yeah.
What are our thoughts on them?
I was going to say sympathetic. So it's, from that perspective, it's funny because for me, like Dedra, when she first started off, when you first get into like what her world is like there is that sympathy. There's no doubt. She is trying to struggle and like make it into like her position. And like you had mentioned before, like this is different than the Empire we've seen before. This is more like the not necessarily the pencil pushers, but this is the ISB. Like these are the ones who are looking for those insurgents. Like who's not loyal to the Empire?
Oh, yeah.
Like who are the enemies from within? Like what is that sort of stuff? So these are the ones who are essentially not necessarily the shit stirrers, but they really are. They're like, well, we don't like the way like these people are organizing. Let's go in there and interrupt that. Let's do that.
You're rooting for her, but then you also you're rooting for her because she's being marginalized and dismissed. And you can tell she's really competent, yes. But then you're like, wait a minute, she's like a Gestapo person. Like I shouldn't be rooting for this character, but you kind of are rooting for her.
So I would have to say that I was rooting for her until you see that torture scene with Pot, and then followed up by Bix, because that's where she really, really shows like. And it's a parallel to Luthen for some, and we'll get to that later on. But it is that parallel where she's willing to do whatever it takes to succeed in what she's doing. And you see that with Pak. So the shopkeeper who Bix used his shop as kind of like a cover for when she was communicating with Luthen. You go into the yard and you go in there and she would do that. So that's what gets him caught. They trace back the signal, that last call she made to Luthen, to his shop. They take him in, they torture this guy, and then they're about to bring in Bix because they've caught Bix. They're about to bring her in. And then the officer on duty is like, well, I'd like to hang this guy in the square to show the people not to mess with us, blah, blah. And rather than say like, no, that's uncalled for, or we already got what we have. She's like, yeah, sure. I don't care what you do to him. Now it's time, just leave him in here long enough for Bix to see like what we've done to him. And then you can take him out and hang him and do whatever the hell you want with his body. So like, that was like, oh, okay, that's messed up, Dedra. Like, what happened, girl? And then all of a sudden, like, you see the way she interacts with Bix. And as she's questioning her, she's talking about how like, oh yeah, it's going to go a lot easier. You just tell me like the truth. And Bix is like, you're not going to believe anything I say anyway. And she's like, yeah, I'm not. So bring in the torturers. So like, and after that, like she lost me. Then it was like, okay, well, now you know, like, it's like, yes, she is, like you said, she's a Gestapo agent. She's coming in and she's going to do exactly what she needs to do to take down whatever rebels she defies or whatever she considers a threat.
Yeah. And then we have Syril, who's, I don't know how to say this. He's a loser, and he's just pathetic. He has this mission, or what's the name of the planet? I wrote it down here. I don't remember.
Are you talking about
Morlana? Was it Morlana? The planet that the series starts on, where the initial murder where Andor kills the two.
Oh, that's right. That was not on Varys. They traced them back from there. That's right.
Yeah. When that story arc starts, and they have that one local security guard who's really kind of pushing him along, and that guy seems to be a true believer to the Emperor. You get the sense that Syril really just wants to prove himself and have a big title and to do something important. And that's really it. It's not even really political. It's personal ambition, I think. And then when it all falls apart and he has to move in with his mom, and then he becomes obsessed, I feel like, with Dedra, he's really kind of a pathetic figure. And it would be easy to just be like, oh, this guy's so gross. But even him, I'm sort of rooting on some level for him to succeed or come out on top. Or he's a sympathetic figure, even though he's a very pathetic figure. It's interesting. They did a good job with him.
Yeah, it is interesting because you've seen characters like that in history. Like there are those throughout just our world history, is those people who like they believe so much in their cause that even when it's not necessarily the right cause, they still just want it to succeed because they dedicated their entire life to this thing. And for them to like believe that they've dedicated their entire life to this and it's flawed and it's a broken system, like it's too much for them. Like they just can't let it go. And I think that's the biggest thing with Syril is that he can't accept the Empire for its failures and its like weaknesses. That's how he ends up in the situation he gets in to begin with, where his supervisor's like, those two guards are probably messing with this guy. First of all, they were at what would be a galactic strip club, like wherever that was, where they ran into Cassian.
I don't think it was a strip club. I think it was a brothel, actually.
Well, there you go.
But it's Disney Plus, so they couldn't say it. But I feel if you go ourselves, I actually think that was a brothel.
For sure.
Yeah.
So like they were where they weren't supposed to be. They picked on some guy who they wouldn't have picked on, and he got the best of them. Done and done. Write it up. Let's give him like a hero's, move it on. And he couldn't accept that, and he kept pushing for it, and then that's what led up to the events that happened on Ferrix because he just wouldn't let it go. And then you're right, like he sees in Dedra, like we're the same person. Like she sees what I see. And it even goes back to that weird encounter that she had with him, like in front of her office. Like after she had interrogated him, like he kind of stalks her because like you said, he's infatuated with her now. It's like, all right, she sees my vision, and he like stops her like on the bridge. And to the point where he like grabs her when she's trying to walk away. And she's like, you know what I can do to you now that you violated this is where I work, this and this. And he just doesn't care, because he feels that connection with her. And man, what a thrill he must have gotten when he saved her in Ferrix and just like brought her out of that stuff. I'm like, oh man, like this is gonna turn into like some like HBO like sort of Game of Thrones type like reward system after here, because it all came in that zoom in where she's like, well, I guess I should thank you. And he was like, no, there's no need to thank me. And I was like, okay. And then it's a cutaway. I'm like, all right, so yeah, like this is a bond that now they're just kind of in it. Like they're intertwined, whether she is the highest of the ISB and he's the lowest of that particular faction. Like it doesn't matter anymore, because now they found that like common ground, and it doesn't matter how passionate he is or like how stern she is. Like now they're in it together. And I'd be curious to see how that develops. Because as you said, like, yeah, it's the sympathy that you gain for these characters, but you also want to see like where these relationships go in that. And again, if you've never had that before in Star Wars, I'm like, oh man, I hope the Emperor gets with that Royal Guard. Like those guys, those side looks that they give each other. Like, yeah, that's happening. But like, no, like now you see like they show the human aspects of both the Empire and the Rebellion. And that's what makes it more interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting because you almost do get kind of incel vibes from Syril. But Dedra doesn't seem to hate him. She seems to have some level of affection for him. I don't think she's romantically attracted to him, but she does seem to have some sense of protection, for want of a better term. Right? She could ruin him if she wants to, but she doesn't. And I think that's interesting. Well, speaking of morally gray characters and characters with a lot of dimension, let's talk about Luthen, who I think is probably the standout character of Andor, and I feel like the one folks talk about the most. What do we feel about Luthen?
Yeah, see, Luthen, it's going to be really interesting to see, and I feel like we're saying interesting a lot just because it is. That's just the word describing. I'm not going to pull up a damn dictionary to think of different interesting phrases. It is very interesting of what where they're going to go with Luthen, just because. And this is going to be the story for a lot of these characters as well, like the way they evolve as the shows continue. Because right now you've got Luthen, and we don't know anything about his past. He does have that one speech with his insider, so he has that insider officer who works in the ISB, and he comes to him because he's like, I want out, this and this and this. And like he does give that big dramatic Luthen speech where he's like, I'm sacrificing so much. I have my wife, I have my child. Like I'm going to lose so much if I do this. Like, what have you sacrificed? And he essentially pulled that Thanos everything. Like I can't sleep like at night knowing that I have like any sense of morality left. I'm going to be like, I have to make decisions where I don't need to care about what happens to the people involved. And you see that with Cregan, where he sacrifices this partner of his just to keep that guy safe, knowing that if he warns Cregan, then the Empire will know, wait a minute, how do they know that we were on to them and that we do that? So he's willing to sacrifice anything and everything so that the cause can push forward. And you see that in that interaction too with Mon Mothma, where he's just kind of pushing her back too and being like, yeah, like I'm just going to do this. Like we had to do this Aldani heist because you weren't able to give us the money. So we're not going to wait for you. We're going to push on and we're going to keep doing this stuff. Like this rebellion isn't slowing down. And like that mentality is going to have to shift for the greater rebellion, because right now what you're seeing is his project. And Tony Gilroy kind of like he emphasized, or he described it in a really interesting way in one of his interviews, or a few of his interviews actually, where he's like, Luthen's the guy who created his startup company in his garage. And the way he's kind of like dealing with it is like, okay, now this thing is blowing up and like growing and growing, and he can't control like all these aspects of it. And for anyone who's created their small business or a little lonely podcast, you know that like in the very beginning, like it's all on you. Like there's nobody else helping you. So you have to manage it. But then for it to become successful and to grow, you have to lean on other people. And that's going to be Luthen's biggest challenge, is that he has to get past the fact that his business is like lies and deceit and espionage, and really like learn how to grow with the rebellion, or he's going to end up just like Saul Guerrera, and he's going to be that like wild card that people can't count on, or like they just kind of afraid of what he's going to do. So that's, yeah, like it's going to be interesting as far as how he grows.
Should be our Andor drinking game. The word interesting. No, I think that's all great. And what it makes me think is his morality is sort of very confined. It's really just he's boiled it down. That speech he gives, his morality has been boiled down to two rules. Something is good if it hurts the Empire, and it's bad if it helps the Empire. And that is it. Everything is in service of the cause. Absolutely everything. And we don't really know his backstory. And, you know, maybe he was a youngling. Maybe he was someone who lost his family. I think we may get a couple hints, but I don't think we're ever going to get a full story. All we know is that this is a man who hates the Empire with every fabric of his being and is willing to devote every single moment for the rest of his life to that singular cause.
Yeah.
And that makes him interesting. I think that makes him very interesting. And I'm glad you brought up how he's going to have to learn to work within the broader rebellion, because he's not a resistance fighter and he's not a rebel in the traditional sense. If I were to use a word to describe him, I would say he's a saboteur, right? That's his sort of model of operation. He's like a spy or head spy / saboteur, where his model is, I'm going to infiltrate the Empire and we're going to blow stuff up and hurt people. And then eventually this is going to become something else. But right now it's sort of like we have these sort of small to middle-sized operations dedicated to sort of like poking holes in the Empire. And you have the sense that there is a larger plan at work, but we're not even close to that yet. And that he has, like, this is part 10 of a 40-step plan to defeat the Empire. And I think he also knows, as alluded to the speech, he might not be alive for the final stages of that plan. He says something like curse and a sunrise that he'll never see.
Yeah.
It's
that big dramatic speech. And this show is littered with just these big, like influential, like just inspiring speeches. And every time, like I just actually had gone back and I rewatched the whole first season of Andor again, just to like prep for this, just to remind myself who's what. There's so many little like cogs in this machine that's kind of bringing up like the different functions and brings it all together. And it's true, like there are just these sporadic scenes in all these different arcs where there are these speeches given, and it never gets tiring. It's never like, oh, now here's another speech. Like, all right, let me go get a drink and I'll be back after the speech. Because it's almost like every word, every sentence like plays to the overall plot, and also just kind of brings home why everyone is doing this without like the just random like fillers or like MacGuffins where it's like, oh yeah, this is why this person's doing it. This is why. It's like, no, like they make you believe like why they're doing what they're doing. And like, that's very important to make a show successful, to bring in that user. So yeah, Luthen is that man he's bringing the chaos and he's instigating that response from the Empire because he knows that people aren't going to act until it affects them. And until they see how cruel the Empire can be, they're just going to sit back and let the Empire do what the Empire is doing and just grow and grow and grow. And that clashes with our good friend Mon Mothma and her beliefs. So tell me what your thoughts are on how's Mon Mothma going to deal with this? Like, poor Mon Mothma. She's kind of tied at both ends. What's happening to Mon Mothma?
So here's where I think the Mon Mothma story is building to. I think it's interesting that they included it in there because in many ways it hasn't paid off yet. And her storyline doesn't really intersect with Andor's that much. It obviously intersects with Luthen's. So you have to ask, why did they include it in the first season? What is it building to? And here's what I think it's building to. Obviously, she cannot die because she's in the original films. But at the same time, we see that she has a family and she has a husband and she has a daughter. And this is only a guess, but I don't think it's that her husband and daughter are going to die. I think Mon Mothma is going to make a big sacrifice because in many ways, one of the themes of the show is what sacrifices are you willing to make for the cause you believe in? I think she's going to lose her family in a more sort of tragic sense where they're going to disown her or she's going to have to disown them and she's never going to see them again. And that's very sad. And I think that's where the storyline with the gangster is also building up to, too. You get there's this sort of sense of foreboding, this sense of doom that the daughter is, going to marry the son of this big crime lord. And it's like, oh, that can't be good. And you also get the sense that the daughter is being brainwashed into these sort of very kind of traditionalist, almost like patriarchal ways of being, where Mon Mothma is sort of this big leader, and the daughter doesn't really seem to believe or buy any of that and just sort of kind of dismisses everything her mom is doing. So I think we're building up to a kind of tragedy where she has to say goodbye to her family and never sees them again. That's my guess.
Yeah, it's interesting again. It's interesting and it's fun because her family almost resents her for what she's doing in every step of the way. And you had mentioned her daughter, like when she's having that discussion with Vel, because Vel, who we learn, is her cousin. So she shows up and we're like, well, what's Vel doing here? Kind of like blowing your cover here. But no, Vel is her cousin. And when she shows up, she's in that like dinner area with a bunch of other youth. And it's something about the practices or the it's almost like religion. So it's almost like they're in prayer, but not like they're in there for any of my fellow Catholics out there or whatever. It's that like, oh, you have to take before you get baptized. You have to go through these classes. You're not baptized, the first communion or whatever it is. Like, see how good of a Catholic I am. Whatever it is that you have to do before you take this process. So like they're going through their scripture. They're learning all these like things that they have to learn. And she's like, yeah, like she wants to do this. Like this is her because Belle's like, tell me you're not like doing this. Like, she's like, no, like this is all her. Like, so it's almost like it's like reverse rebellion where she's like, oh, instead of being like rebellious, I'm going to be super conservative. So I'm going to go to church and I'm going to just like, I'm going to eat my vegetables and there's nothing you can do about it, mom. Like it's that aspect of it because she knows that her mother doesn't agree with a lot of those like conservative and like weird, like traditional aspects of Coruscant or wherever it is that they're particularly getting these traditions from, because I know they're in Coruscant, but it's not necessarily these are the traditions of the people of Coruscant. Who knows, like I'm sure it's in there, but like I'm not aware of where these traditions are, whether it's their family or wherever it is, or maybe just their position in the current government, where if you're in this position, you have to do this, which goes to what you're mentioning about marrying off your daughter to like form an alliance with another family. It's very Game of Thrones-ish in that sense. And you're seeing that develop. And meanwhile, on the side of her husband, there's all these like red flags on the husband. You learn that he used to be bad in gambling, so he's a gambling debt, and Mon Mothma is cleverly using that to try to like explain where her money's going, because now they know the Empire's going into all the senators' like banks and looking to see like, hey, where's this money being spent and that sort of stuff. She has to kind of do a cover up, and she knows her driver's a spy. So she uses that. So the guy's he's got a bad past in his gambling. And there is a scene of tension between them when he's inviting over some friends for dinner. And it turns out to be like all the people that she argues with and fights with in the Senate. So he's friends with all of her enemies, all of her political enemies, all those people that make her life an absolute hell. Like he's buddies with them. And his nagging wife is just causing problems in the Senate. Why can't she behave? So like that bridge is already broken almost between them. And I feel like it has to, like, I'm glad we're different on this opinion, because whereas you feel like, oh, it's not necessarily going to be a loss, like I feel like we're prepping for like a wedding kind of situation here. And for those who don't watch Game of Thrones or haven't watched Game of Thrones, it is that glorious wedding that's supposed to like unify the families and that sort of stuff. So that's Mon Mothma's way to unify with Davo and get him to help her with the finance stuff. It was set up by her childhood friend Tay, who's like going to be there. I feel like all the people who are on the Mon Mothma side are going to be in one spot. And whether or not her husband's just going to like give her up, maybe he'll stumble upon something. He's like, wait a minute, like this sneaky minx here is doing something bad, and try to like turn her into the ISB. And then they respond in kind, over rambunctious, as they always do in these kind of situations. And they can just go in there and attempt to slaughter them all. Maybe we'll see that. My only hesitation in whether or not they actually will do that is because there's another massacre that we know is coming. Only because Tony Gilroy had already spoke about it in his interviews, and that's the Gorman massacre, which is a big deal in like Star Wars mythos, and it hasn't been really shown in any movies or any films. It was referenced in Rebels. But aside from that, there's a lot of different references in books and that sort of things that have been canon, that necessarily haven't been canon. And for those who aren't aware, the Gorman massacre is just a peaceful protest that occurs and then turns into an absolute bloodbath set up by the Empire. And it's just a full-on massacre of everybody who was there. Remind me about that later on during our predictions aspect here. And that acts as like the pushing point for Mon Mothma, as far as like her to speak out in the Senate against the Emperor directly, and how that kind of motivates her in order to just speak out and become an enemy of the state, essentially, because she goes in a public forum and denounces the Emperor and that sort of stuff. So I feel like that's already going to do that job. It might be overkill to do like a red wedding. So maybe you're right. Maybe it is just that, like, I can't stand you, Mom, or I can't stand you, wife. Like, Mom, you're always causing this stuff. You don't understand us. Like, you're married to your Senate. Well, enjoy your Senate. But I don't know if that's going to be a clean enough break for the Empire to be like, okay, fine, we'll leave the family alone.
Yeah. Regardless, this is a family that's about to fall apart. Well, speaking of families that have been torn apart, the series starts with a bit of a mystery, which is what happened to Cassian's sister. And to borrow a term from Alfred Hitchcock, this is the MacGuffin of the story. It's the thing that sets the story forward. But by the end of the season, we don't really hear much about it, and we really aren't any closer to what actually happened to Cassian's sister. So what do we think happened, and do we even really care?
Yeah. So that's interesting in the sense that, man, this interesting thing. I'm going to have to, all right, guys, ladies and gentlemen at home, you're going to have to take a shot every time either Brian or myself says interesting. It's just official. It is our game now. Let's do this. So I don't think we're going to see or hear anything more of Andor's sister. I think it was meant to just be what puts him in that situation. They do reference it a little later on in season 1, where Marva just says there's no survivors left. And for those who are just trying to having a little trouble, like thinking back to it, Cassian and his sister, they were part of almost like a Lord of the Flies type family situation where it was a planet off in, I can't remember the name of the planet. That's going to kill me because not Kessel. Anyway, it was from that planet, and it was an imperial mining operation. So the locals worked in the mining shaft. So it is that traditional workers in the mine collapses, big tragedy, all the adults are killed, and then what's left over is the kids, and the Empire just kind of wipes their hands of it, and they're like, whatever. So what's left is the Lord of the Flies, kind of like children are left to rule themselves. A ship crashes onto that planet. They go to investigate. Their child leader is shot, but Marva and Clem, who turned out to be the adopted parents of Andor, they're like scavengers or something of that nature, where they go and they strip the ship and they stumble upon Cassian there, and Marva can't leave without him. So she comes and she takes him, and they essentially take him away from his family and his sisters. But from her opinion, when they're in there looking through everything, it's that we have to get out of here because the Empire's on their way, or whoever it is who's in charge. I almost think that they say the Alliance or the Republic is on their way, and that they're going to wipe up whoever it is. And I mean, if that is, I'm trying to think of when that would take place as far as who's in charge of the government at that point. But her mentality at the time is that they're going to slaughter everybody who, once they show up and find out what's happened and see what's happened, they're going to take it out on whoever's left. And that's going to wipe out the kids. And I think that's where it's going to end. They're just going to think that, okay, it's done. Like, I don't think there's enough. I mean, we might just toss that in, but Tony Gilroy has been very adamant about, like, if I'm going to put somebody in there, it's going to have to serve a purpose. So unless he runs into her on like Yavin or Dantooine or something like that, then like, I don't see how they can bring her back.
Yeah, I think we might get a few hints, but I don't think we're going to get much beyond that, because it's not really about what the show is about. It's just sort of the thing that moves it forward, because without looking for his sister, Cassian doesn't really have anything that motivates him, right?
Yeah.
It's the only thing that he seems to actually care about. And he loves Marva, but that doesn't seem to be, anything that following in Marva's footsteps or putting down roots on Ferrix does not seem to interest him at all. So speaking of Ferrix, I just want to talk about the show structure, because I think that, the way I would divide up the show is sort of these sort of like 4 blocks that happen throughout the show. Which of them are your favorite? Which of the storylines that we encounter are your favorite?
Yeah, so all of those blocks, even though they're individual, they all play a key part in just kind of how Cassian ends up in the situation he does and how the story moves forward eventually into Rogue One. And I think they're very important, going back to what we first talked about like the revolution, the rebellion, and how that kind of forms itself out. It shows 3 different aspects of what would happen in a time like this. So you have your first, like the Aldani heist. Let's start like with that one. As far as, I mean, you said 4. Are you counting the Cassian situation with the brothel and then killing the guards, going into hiding, and then that sort of stuff, which leads him essentially to run off with Luthen? So that would be in itself just the introduction of, like you had mentioned, Cassian being thrown into this whole situation. But going from the heist, you see what a small group, like a small rebel cell, would essentially do and what they can accomplish on their own. Like they went in there, like they were able to like steal all the credits from Aldani, that big old, and like they said, one of the things that resonated with me the most is when Luthen is asking Cassian how he ended up stealing that. It was like a navigator tracker, something like that, a star map navigator, insert technical term here. And he's like, I just walked in. Like, they're so arrogant. They're so full of themselves. Like, they can't imagine that someone would dare violate their sanction, would just have the guts to just walk in and just act like they own the place, because that's their arrogance, that's their pride. And it's that sort of mentality that they take advantage of in Aldani, so that they can go in there and just show up as 4 extra troops. Like 4 extra troops show up, 4 extra troops, insert number of troops here that was in their gang that just showed up, walking the natives to like their place of worship there. Like they just showed up out of nowhere. Like nobody was like, oh yeah, where do these guys come from? Like nobody bothered even checking them. They were in uniform. They were doing the walk. They walked on in. So like they went they went into the I was gonna say bank, but I guess you can call it a bank for lack of a better term.
A vault, yeah.
A vault, and then they were able to steal it. But in doing so, like you see like the issues with that like sort of group, like their failures, how like things started falling apart, how they started losing people, how like the 2 inside men got killed off, how this poor kid, I wish I remember his name because he was one of my favorites in that, where he was the one who came up with a manifesto. He was in it for the passion and the reason of the rebellion. Like that's all he cared about. And he ends up getting crushed by like just his pallets of credits just because of how everything's going. And then once they get there to the hospital or to the person to like help him, like he ends up dying. And then meanwhile, outside, you have the guy who's going to go there and betray them, Mr. Yesha, like going to go and betray them. And like, and so Cassian has to kill him. And then after that, he has to essentially tell Bell at gunpoint he's taking what he wants, he's getting the hell out of there because the whole little cell falls apart. So it shows that. And then you follow Cassian on to just running away with his credits and just, he tries to tell Marva to go with him. She doesn't want to. So he just goes on his own. And he essentially plays the role of the man who puts his head in the sand. Who's like, if I stay away from this rebellion, this resistance, if I can stay away from this authoritarian like overrule, that it's going to stay away from me. I just have to stay out. Like, I'm not involved with it. I'm not going to make a difference. Like, this doesn't affect me. Why would I bother with it? Goes to a beach, just so happens to run into a droid or a stormtrooper who just looked at him the wrong way. Shore trooper? Yeah. My favorite, the beach troopers, who just sees him in the same area as some other random thugs or random people who are just running off, and then just gets pulled into that whole situation with the prison where he gets dragged in, like just to show you how quickly on a turn or flip of a coin you can be in the wrong place and then brought right back into something that you're trying to avoid just because you matched the description of what these insurgents would look like. You're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And by then you're trapped, and you're trapped in that system that is already broken. There's no way out, only one way out, as we've learned. And the whole story with tonygilroy, who's like, he plays that role of the person who like he still believes, even though he's in prison, he still believes that like they're going to do the right thing. I'll serve my time and I'll be getting out. And then no, like eventually once they learn that, yeah, they're just shifting people from prison to prison and hoping they don't notice that, like that's what inspires him to get out because of that. And it is that secondary part of or third part of that revolution where it's like, you can't be that inactive person where you have to like look up and you just kind of hoping that it doesn't take you in consideration. You're hearing about that even now in world events, not to get like too political as far as that. It's like people who thought that they were safe are now like seeing their livelihoods threatened and their jobs being taken away and that sort of stuff. And it's that like, oh, what? That wasn't supposed to affect me. So now Cassian's in that situation where he's in that and he gets forced into that. And then of course, the very end, which is my favorite, is that whole riot, what turns into from funeral to the spark of the rebellion in that sense, at least on Ferrix, is when they just had enough. And Marva gives her speech and the whole like big emotional thing of what she's dedicated her life to, what she's hoped to inspire in people. And then it just ends with fight the rebellion. And that is just the culmination, is that the word? Culmination of like everything that the show's been building up a bit. You've seen the individual insurgent cells. You've seen those who try to duck and hide it. You've seen those who try to use it for their profit and end up getting just there's so the way to do it is to come together and to just like fight for everything you've got, using what you've got, not in a Luthen sense, but in a passion sense, in a wise sense, in the way that, you know, like to put your heart into it to make a difference.
Yeah, I would say Marva is where the sort of the spirit of where the rebellion is headed, right? Which is open rebellion, which is people getting people together and saying, we're not going to live like this and we're not going to take this anymore. We're not going to put up with it. And so maybe that's a good segue into our last segment, which is what do we think is going to happen this season? What are our predictions? And maybe even if you're going to take some bets on who we think is going to live and who's going to show up.
Difficult to see. Always in motion is the future.
Welcome, everybody, to the predictions portion of our episode, in which we are going to predict essentially who we think is going to live on or just get wiped out in season 2, or just where we think they'll progress within this next season. Before we do that, let's kind of jump into what we know about season 2. So season 2 is going to take place 1 year after that riot in Ferrix. It's going to be released in about 3 episodes per week. Now, Tony Gilroy has already apologized to us in advance as far as content creators for the fact that each week is essentially going to be releasing a Star Wars movie per week. So I'm guessing these are going to be longer in length episodes, not what we've been seeing previously out of Star Wars, where it's about 20, 30 minutes, including credits sometimes. So that's exciting to me. I don't mind the fact that we're going to get maybe a 3-hour-long segment of Andor in week after week after week. I'm not one who's ever been, I'm just going to be too much Star Wars for me at this time. Bring me a movie a week. I'm in on it. Let's do it. So with that being said, let us jump into these characters and see what we think is going to happen to each of these characters. Brian, you want to kick us off with Luthen? Right now on screen, for our viewers at home, we've got Team Luthen. We've got Luthen, Clea, Vel, Cinta, and Saw Gerrera. I threw him in there because he needs a team. So, Brian, want to take it away with what you think is going to happen to these people?
Sure. I think the safest prediction I can make is that my boy Luthen is not long for this world. Both the plot and the sort of the themes of the series demand that he die. I think it happens before the halfway mark of the season. I think it's going to happen early on. I think it's important to Cassian's character development, and it's going to be a big, epic moment, whatever it is. But he knows he's going to die, so this is sort of part of his master plan. With regard to Clea, I don't know if she'll die with him, or if she sort of assumes another role, or maybe takes another role in the Rebel Alliance. Is possible. Vel and Cinta, am I getting their names right? Anyways, yes, one or both are going to die, right? This is not a series with happy endings. You know, one of the major themes of Andor is sacrifice, the things you sacrifice for a cause, and love is going to be one of the things that's going to be sacrificed. So there's no way these two are just kind of riding off into the sunset. And Saw, we'll get more Saw. I don't know if we'll necessarily get some Andor interacting with Saw that might mess up some of the continuity of Rogue One, but I imagine Cassian will run into members of Saw's gang and Saw's ideology at some point and sort of grapple with the kind of Luthen school of things versus the Saw school of things.
Yeah, that's a great point, because when he meets Saw in Rogue One, they're just thrown in his prison. But then again, and this is something I was thinking about too in regards to Saw, I can jump back to the other characters shortly, is the fact that while I was rewatching the first season, that Saw seems out of it, but not that out of it as he is once Rogue One hits. I don't know whether or not he was hanging out with Borgullet too much, and then Borgullet is just kind of sneaking a little brain sleep while he was like passed out or something like that. Who knows? But he doesn't seem as just like in and out, like almost symptoms of Alzheimer's when he's talking at times, just forgetting where he is, talking, that sort of stuff. So I don't know if we're going to see Cassian directly relating with Saw. He might run into Two Tubes. I mean, Two Tubes have been back and forth all over this place. So maybe Two Tubes just wants to mess with Cassian. They have like a bad interaction. He's like, I'm not even going to tell Saw about this guy. I'm just going to let him rot in there. So I would be interested to see what they're going to include as far as Saw goes and how he builds his group. I feel as though there's going to be one of those big moments, as you had kind of mentioned, whether or not it is the fall of Luthen, in which most people kind of split up into, okay, who are we going with as far as, are we going to join like Mon Mothma segment of this group, or are we going to join the more radical Saw Gerrera version of this group? So it would be, it's piqued my interest as far as how that's going to go into play, and if we're going to get to see Saw in action. We haven't really get to see Saw in action. We've seen him in Clone Wars. We've seen him in Rebels as far as their missions that he takes place in. But live action Saw has kind of just been woes me as far as his man of action type situation. As far as Lucid, I can agree with you with Luthen that he will be killed off. I like your thoughts that he's going to be wiped out in the first half of this season. That'll be that'll be a good play as far as just kind of changing things up, especially with those time jumps. I feel like we're going to get a lot of those big moments and then end of the 3 episodes, moving on to the next year in a good kind of balanced way. Clea or Leia have maybe. I've heard those rumors about whether or not Clea might be Leia in disguise. I don't think that's true. I think that's just them paralleling haircuts to haircuts. Like, hey, she's kind of fashionable. Like, she's got a little buns in the top, and then sometimes she has it down, and sometimes I just think that's just her way of kind of disguising herself when she's in different situations. Very similar to Luthen and his awesome wig, or without it. So I think she's definitely going to be killed off. I feel as though she might attempt to sacrifice herself for Luthen or put herself in a situation where there is no escape, and then she'll be wiped out just the same. I go back and forth between Vel and Cinta as far as which one's going to die. I'm leaning towards Cinta just because in the past we've seen how dedicated she is to the cause. And Vel has always had that sort of balance between her personal life, her love life, because they're together and she looks at her in a different way than Cinta looks towards her. It's almost as though she'll love Vel when it's appropriate. In times of rebellion and war, the love kind of falls behind depending on your place within that war. So it would be just kind of that way of balancing out who's who. So they might turn the tables on us. We may think Cinta's the one who's going to do something for the cause and get wiped out, when in reality, maybe it's Vel and Cinta's left behind. I doubt that's the case. I'm going to lean with Cinta being wiped out and Vel just having that drive that kind of pushes her towards what Cinta wanted her to see of how important this cause was. And those are my thoughts. So Luthen down, Clea down, Vel will walk away. We know Saw's going to walk away. Cinta, not so much. Good things for all that poor dedicated team. So our next group of survivors, maybe, is Team Mon Mothma. We've got Mon Mothma, we've got Perrin, Leda, Tay, and good old Davo. So, Brian, initial thoughts on Team Mon Mothma?
So, I don't necessarily know if any of them are going to die. But Mon Mothma's husband is definitely going to be out of the picture. That I am very confident of, right? We would see him in the future. I think the way the story is building is that he disowns her, or she, through a force of events, has to disown him, or maybe he dies in a raid or something like that. But they're not going to be together. Davo, I don't know, because he's a scoundrel and he could survive. But he could also just be too trapped in, this rebel espionage plot that the Empire takes him out. As far as the daughter's concerned, it would be really dark for Mon Mothma's daughter to die. I think more likely she's going to have to denounce her mom. It's going to be sort of a tragic ending, because that family is headed for a very tragic end.
Yeah, I almost want that to happen, just because of your initial reaction to it'd be really dark if they kill off the daughter. And it's not really something, well, we've seen it from a non-personalized perspective a lot in Star Wars. I think the closest we've got to it is Uncle Ben and Aunt Peru's skeletons just crawling and burnt up there. Like, that's the most graphic. Just off the top of my head, I'm trying to think of somebody else. I mean, you have Harrison Ford getting that like blade through the chest, and you've seen deaths throughout Star Wars, but just absolute, like, we have Leia's planet being blown up, and how many millions of people died in that. But to see this, the way they've been building Mon Mothma's family together so that each and every one of these characters would make it really interesting. I know earlier I had kind of brought up the idea of the Red Wedding, where it is that wedding that Mon Mothma.
Yeah, I was just going to say it would be Game of Thrones level death.
Exactly. And I think, we, not necessarily that you need it, but it's always good to just kind of remind people of just how dire situations can be in these sort of events. Because yes, it is a Star Wars show. It is on disneyplus. On a sidebar, I've been watching Daredevil, the new season, which is excellent, but there's a lot of just brutality in that show that you wouldn't really expect from a Disney Plus. And I'm not saying we need more blood and violence in Star Wars, but the the things that Tony Gilroy is able to achieve on that level of realism and like importance has been just something that's been astonishing throughout his role in Star Wars, how he does kind of bring that seriousness and that tone to Star Wars. And I wouldn't think he'd shy away from something like this, where they would do that red wedding kind of thing where Mon Mothma and Dabo are kind of getting together. I think Perrin and his ignorance or jealousy or whatever he has against his wife may get the better of him. I think he may try to rat them out if he discovers something that's going on between them, or maybe he's just a jealous husband who thinks that her and Tay are just having an affair in the side when in reality they're working together on their project, so on so on. So I feel like he's going to rat them out to the Empire, and then they're going to come, and then when they're all in one place, just kind of one after the other. I mean, look at Tay. He knows it's coming. Like even his profile, he's looking off to a side, just all scared and confused. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that goes through and there's a red wedding in Star Wars and we lose all of them. We lose Perrin, we leave Leda, we lose Tay, we lose Dabo, and Mon Mothma is the only one standing. My only hesitation in that is just that they're going to touch upon the Gorman Massacre. Tony Gilroy has mentioned that it's going to be 5 episodes long. I'm sure it's going to be broken up into them building up to the events that are going to happen, very similar to the ride on Ferrix, where like these little things are happening. So they're building up to what it's going to become. Then you have the actual massacre itself, and then you have the kind of fallout. I feel as though it'll follow that structure. So I'm not sure if they will go with 2 massacres in one season. That might be a little bit an overkill, but yeah, nothing good happening for family Mothma. I feel as though it has to be something that serious, just because I don't believe the Empire will just let her family go and they can use that as leverage, even if they are ostracized from each other or get divorced or whatever aspect of Fallout it wants to be. The Empire doesn't really seem to care about legalities, so they'll just use any leverage they can to get to them. So those are
it's not going to be a tearful hug goodbye.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
This is building up to some kind of tragedy. We just don't know what yet.
Yeah, which brings us to our next team. These are our heroes, our main heroes. We've got Cassian Bix, Brazo, K2SO, B2EMO, and Wilmon. So, Brian, where do you think is going to happen to our heroes? Where are they going to end up? What's going to become of each of these?
I could see Bix might not be long for this world either, or she joins the Rebel Alliance. I think we're going to see terrible things happen to the people of Ferrix. I think the Empire is going to come down hard to make an example of them. I don't know if we'll actually see that, or we'll just, in the time skip, revisit Ferrix and see that, so many important people have died and whatnot. I think the droid
they'll do that? They'll do like a jump off and, oh man, isn't it a shame what happened to Brazos?
Yeah, I think the droid lives.
Which one?
Yes, the droid lives.
I propose this off screen and off air. If we think that maybe B will become K, B2 to K2, their personalities are way different, but that bond that Cassian, or they seem to have the Cassian, is there. Do you think they'll have that transfer? Or you just think we're going to lose B outright?
No, I think that was sort of already done in Solo, and I don't know if they're going to revisit the whole like one machine becoming another machine.
Oh, I totally forgot about that.
Yeah. So I don't know. That's a motif. And I'm not sure people loved it when they did it in Solo. So I don't know if they want to revisit that whole chapter, but we'll see.
Yeah, I agree with you as far as I think Bix is going to be wiped out. For sure, I think she's going to pass away. I think Brazo, he's a man on the ground, like a front-facing soldieress. They don't usually long last. And I think Wilmon's kind of going to go away of the younger guy from their team in the first season, where something unfortunate happens to him and it just happens. And then I'm really interested to see how far into the season we're going to see a K2SO. I'm wondering if it's going to be that Luthen thing that you kind of brought up, where halfway through the first season or halfway through the season, he just kind of pops in, and then I'd hope so, at least before halfway through. We're thinking before halfway, or week before 2 or halfway. Week 1?
That seems like it's going to be a fun storyline, which is funny because it's, I wouldn't necessarily describe Andor as a fun show, even though it's a great show. But introducing a little bit of dark comic levity, I think, will help balance out some of the dark stuff that we know is coming. So I think we're going to see him in like the first 25% of the show.
I kind of want him to go back just directly to that beach where that droid caught him and find that droid just to turn him just out of his own personal mission of revenge to get back at that droid who took his life away from him. But that's neither here nor there. So those are our heroes. And now we're going to move on to the villains. Can we honestly just call them villains? Or are we going to say that they're redeemable? Unredeemable. So we've got Team Krennic with Syril and Dedra. Thoughts on all three?
So I could actually see Deirdre joining the Rebel Alliance. I know folks might disagree with me on that. Yes, but I think it'll be interesting when she does, because I could actually see her joining the Rebel Alliance for the wrong reasons. I think ultimately she's going to be drummed out of the Empire and will want revenge. And maybe the rebels are like, all right, we'll take her, Syril, I don't know. I think he either dies or he gets what he wants in the end, but at a terrible cost. What he really wants is to have the job he originally had and not be living at his home with his mom again. I think we're going to see a dark ending for Syril regardless.
Do you think there's going to be any continuation of whatever connection there is between Syril and Dedra? Is it strictly professional? Are we looking at an Empire romance?
Romance is a little strong. I think that they have a connection. He's clearly obsessed with her on a personal, romantic level. I don't know if she feels the same way, but she does feel a certain level of, if not kinship, pity toward him, right? Almost like Frodo and Gollum in Lord of the Rings. It was like the two were sort of bonded together at this point. And I think she does kind of care about him to a certain extent. I don't think she loves him in any traditional sense.
So you're saying Syril is her Gollum?
Yes.
What do you think they're going to do with Krennic this episode?
I have no idea.
There and chewing this.
I have no idea. They'll give him some little cool storyline. Maybe he clashes with, where's the name of Deirdre's boss? I don't know if he's a monk.
Very good question, of which I do not remember.
Yes. I could see the two, because that guy played Qyburn in Game of Thrones. I could see the two of them sort of batting heads. That would be a nice little conflict. Yeah,
I agree. I think that we're going to get a lot of, I believe that Krennic may actually kind of be the bridge to different characters that are playing parts both on the Empire side, and over on the Rebellion side. We'll get more into that a little later. And then Syril, I think, is going to be taken out in the Gorman Massacre. I think that event is going to be very important, and I think it'll be good to show important people on both sides of that battle get taken out for something that just gets out of control. So I think we're losing Syril, definitely. Dedra, I feel as though I'm going to go against the Rebellion joining. I feel like when you said the first thing I thought of when you said, she's going to join the Rebellion was, what's the name of purple hair from the sequel trilogy?
Laura Dern's character?
Laura Dern's character. Yeah. It's like, maybe that's her. And it's a Laura Dern origin story from there. That's why she's so dedicated and sends her ship through that Star Destroyer, because she needs to avenge all of what she was responsible for when she was younger. This is going to be that origin story within an origin story. Forget the Clea being Leia. No. We've got that going on to us. And yeah, I think that Krennic is going to be that connecting chapter, which would lead to our next group of the heroes and villains that essentially are cameos, possible cameos, but they play more important roles in this than I think most would give them credit for. So we've got Bail Organa. We've got, my mind just slipped right now, in Galen Erso, Bodhi Rook, Grand Moff Tarkin, and the Emperor. So, Brian, where do you think we're going to see all of these characters? Will we see all of them? Will we see some of them? Do you think there's some that just don't belong in the story?
So I think for both Bail and Galen, we'll get flashes of them, even if it's just really quick, right? Because we're building right up to Rogue One, and I think they're going to have that carry over. I hope it's not just like a cheesy little cameo, and maybe something even just a little bit more substantial than that. We'll see. I think we'll definitely get Grand Moff Tarkin, if only as a hologram or whatnot. He's too important a figure to the Empire. And, I'll even go so far to say, yeah, I do think we'll get a flash of the Emperor before the season is over. One of the things we've sort of lost since the prequels is the sense of Emperor Palpatine as a politician, right? Because he started as a politician, right? And he can't just be, evil hooded guy during the whole Empire. You'd think he's got like a State of the Empire speech that he's got to do every once in a while. He's got to do some politicking. So, he's got to like wave to the people sometimes. And it'd be fun to at least have a small bit of moment of that. Because if everyone in the Empire hated him all the time, I don't think the Empire would work. There has to be some sort of level of, if not admiration, at least celebration of him, like all despots. All despots need to, be have their egos stroked and have the public sort of praise or worship them. So I wouldn't be shocked if before the season is over, we do get some sort of flash of the Emperor.
Now, with Bail Organa, are we going to get any Leia mention or even see her? And that's one that I go back and forth on, just because by this point, she is a detrimental part to the rebellion. In fact, that's how Rogue One ends, with them giving over the Death Star plans to her on that ship. So we know she's an active part in this during this time period. I'm going to go back to Rebels just because I love Rebels. But they do have that episode in the earlier seasons where she shows up and they interact with Leia just on the, I was going to say battlefield, but it's not necessarily battlefield, but just out and about, like on the grounds, like taking part in certain parts of these missions. So I don't believe it'd be just a crazy thought that they may run into her. I think it would be more of a, how would they practically do it, or how would they achieve that appearance without making it seem like pandering to fans, or making her appearance in Rogue One seem less important, which I think is also something they're going to be trying to balance with. Like, we don't want to take away from Rogue One, but we want to just give more back to the lore. So you think we're going to see anything Leia-ish?
I think that last part you said about not taking away from the ending of Rogue One is key. So I don't think we're going to see her here. We'll probably get a passing reference.
Yeah,
we'll get some references to Alderaan, and that there's a key person on Alderaan or something like that. But I don't think, because it would take away the punch of the ending of Rogue One if we saw her, because then it's like it to a certain extent it almost becomes like a Marvel movie cameo at that point, like an after the credits Marvel movie cameo, which the first one is already kind of like that. So if you keep going to that well every time, it's just a little less exciting. So we'll get like a little cameos and Easter eggs for her name or her role or things like that. But no, I don't think we'll see.
And it is definitely a tricky balance for this sort of kind of jumping back and forth. And, Star Wars has always been like that. There have always been these gaps, which makes this seem even more Star Wars-y than normal or than the previous season, just because we do get those time gaps in between things, which leaves a lot of space for, either the fans or for comics, books, insert random media to fulfill in these things between each of these. So, for example, with Galen Erso and Bodhi Rook, we know that Bodhi was sent by Galen to deliver that message to Saul or Jyn Erso herself, that he was the one that he selected because he knew that Bodhi Rook was having doubts about where he was in the Empire, and he went from pilot for the Empire, which I've always been curious as to far as what was he, a TIE fighter pilot? Was he like a Star Destroyer pilot? Like, what kind of pilot? I've always been curious as the TIE fighter pilots and who's behind them. I never did play that Star Wars game where they kind of took that choose your sides and sort of story of the TIE fighter, but that was very interesting to me. I just didn't have the system at the time. So I would like to kind of see, I know we thought with Finn, Stormtrooper perspective turning, so maybe they'll want to avoid that, but there are different roles that you just can't help but repeat just because that's just how they are. And we see it in real life too. You'll see these alliances that are kind of shifted due to experiences that kind of break up, and it's not something that can't be repeated by just because it happened already. It's just part of life. And it would be interesting just to see the Galen Erso conspiracy side and how he kind of plots and develops that whole Death Star takedown from where he is. So I mentioned about Krennic being that bridge. Krennic and him are direct relations as far as who oversees who, and then the demands that he gets to him. We did have that flashback in Rogue One where they're having dinner together, him, Galen, little baby Jyn Erso. Maybe that's how we see Jyn in this season. Maybe she's the little girl in one of the time jumps. But it would be fascinating just to see that interaction of Galen and Bodhi Rook. And Grand Moff Tarkin, it depends on what they want to do with this whole Gorman massacre thing. And that's going to be a major part in kind of where I want this story to go, just because they are being so, 5 episodes out of it's 4 weeks, 3 episodes. So 12 episodes, that's almost half of the season being dedicated to this one event. I know in the past, of previous, I'm trying to think of whether it was in the book or whether it was in games or something like that, when they have referenced Gorman Massacre, it was that peaceful protest and in order for them to stand up against the Empire, in particular, there was an event where they were blocking the landing pad for Grand Moff Tarkin's ship, and he decided, hey, it'd be a better place to land right on top of these people, and just went on and just landed right on them, massacring hundreds of people. So it would be, I'm not going to say, it'd be great to see that, but it would be more of an impactful moment to just see how he directly is involved with stuff. We've seen it in the past with Rogue One, where he doesn't mind blowing up Scarif just to make sure that the plans of the Death Star don't get out. And even though Krennic's there, he just doesn't care. And Krennic was one of his men. We've seen the conflict with him before. I'm sure he's like, 2 birds, 1 stone. Done and done. But we have seen that lack of hesitation on his perception as far as what is needed to be done. I do think we'll see, as you mentioned, we'll see the Emperor. I think we're going to see him in the Senate room. Going back to that Gorman massacre, I want to see a direct confrontation between Mon Mothma and Palpatine. They're constantly battling from the political aspects, and it's easy to do that. But once you're standing in a ginormous room with ETs and all the other senators, it makes it a little more interesting just to see that face-to-face confrontation. And that'll bring me to my last and most dear cameo that I'm hoping for. So this Gorman massacre, the biggest role that it plays is just kind of that push to a lot of people who are on the fence about whether or not the Empire is really bad or whether we're going to join the rebellion. A lot of people are really comfortable in their cushy little situations, and they don't want to risk that just because they don't see that direct effect on them, or they don't see the Empire as being that cruel. And once a Gorman massacre happens, that is that push from that we've seen in the past. Now, Tony Gilroy has mentioned that the details of that are kind of been up in the air. So he wants to really solidify what happens with the Gorman massacre and the response that comes from it. And one of those that we've seen in the past, Rebels specifically, was the fact that that is what triggers Mon Mothma to stand up and call the Emperor a lying executioner and just directly denounce him in front of the Senate, and then be called a traitor, a terrorist, and be thrown essentially out of that situation. So she'll turn her back on the Senate. She'll declare the Emperor for what he is, and then they declare her an enemy, and then it's all hands on trying to get Mon Mothma out of there. The Gold Squadron in the past has been the ones who've got them out, and they bring her to a little ship known as the Ghost, which is heralded by Hera. Aboard is also Zeb, Ezra, and Chopper. So in this mission where the Gold leader and his team are able to evacuate Mon Mothma out into space and get her off and away from danger, she ends up aboard the Ghost with our beloved Rebels characters. And if there's anything that you know about me, or that our listeners or viewers are going to know about me, is I love Rebels. I think that's some of the greatest story writing. I think it's some of the best Star Wars that we've seen in quite some time. While, yes, it has its campy and cartoony / animation type stuff, I really feel the heart and the story that Dave Filoni puts into it, and all these characters, the lore is heavy in that. As far as just the basics go in Star Wars, that's pushed in there too, but you do have that lore, you do have that dedication to the source material. So I think that the way they were able to take that situation and have Mon Mothma give her speech of the declaration of the Rebel Alliance, where she calls out to all those who've just been sitting there, all the separate cells, to kind of come together and join the Rebel Alliance to make an actual group that can fight against this empire and fight against this tyranny. That's a very important moment in Star Wars history, and it occurs on the Ghost. And I'm really hoping that Tony Gilroy respects that. I don't know how much influence Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau will have in this show. I looked up on IMDb the other day to see if they were listed as executive producers. I feel as though maybe they'll have a similar role they played in Skeleton Crew, where they kind of let the creators do their thing because they're good at what they do, and maybe just kind of throw in the little hints here and there, or just kind of have that. I really want that to be kind of a role that is brought into this show, as far as, okay, well, Mon Mothma gives a speech from the Ghost. How they're going to execute that, I'm not sure. Whether or not it's just going to pull away from the Ghost as you see her entering it, and you don't even see Hera or anybody else on the ship. Maybe it's their backs as Mon Mothma is giving the speech. Something. I want these Rebels characters to come out. I want them to be shown throughout. I want them to be shown and their role to be recognized as the important part that they played in getting Mon Mothma out there, the important part that they played at that first strike of unity against the Empire. So yeah, I want that done. And I think there's a lot more people out there who want it done as well. I don't know, Brian, what do you think? We're going to see Rebels peoples? Am I going to get my Ezra and my Zeb? We've got them already in Mandalorian. You just throw that.
I think they'll preserve they'll preserve the continuity. I don't know if it will necessarily, even if it's just like a shadow or an outline of the ship. I think they'll do their best to at least preserve the continuity. I don't know if we'll necessarily see Hera herself. But we'll see.
Yeah. Any other wild cards out there? I thought of maybe clones, random clones thrown out there. Maybe Rex. I don't think so. I think that goes to your point of just being too much fanfare. I'm trying to remember other characters who were kind of out and about at this time. Like Fulcrum ended up hitting my head. Like, what do you think? Any other names?
The most important character in Rogue One, who is Beaston. And if you don't know who I'm talking about, that is the monkey with a Gatling gun on the Battle of Scarif. He's just a monkey. I don't even know what species he is. To me, he's just literally, which is a lot more funny with me that Gilroy was like, I want a monkey with a gun.
Done.
And they did it.
So he'll be at a bar with Melshi just kind of hanging out, and Solo's hanging out in a corner as well, just kind of turn that crap off. You've got like little flashes over to, and this can all happen during that declaration of Rebel Alliance. Like while Mon Mothma is giving her big dramatic speech, you're just going to see very similar to how they
cigar in the corner, but it puts out the cigar.
How they did
makes a monkey
end up Return of the Jedi, where it's just different.
Take them performance of the gun, you know. So no, it's great. It's gonna be a great moment.
Yeah, I think it'll be great. And those are our predictions for the second season of Andor. I'm really looking forward to that. We haven't even talked about how we're going to cover that. It's going to essentially be 3 movies a week. Have they said what day they're going to announce it? Whether it's Tuesdays or Wednesdays, or usually it's Wednesdays?
Yeah, Disney Plus has been moving to Wednesdays recently, I feel like. So it'll probably be Wednesdays or Thursdays.
All right.
We'll see.
Maybe we'll get our reactions videos filmed for Thursdays. I'm not going to put us any dedication quite so much.
Box or something, but we'll figure it out.
I know I said
we'll bring you up-to-date discussions about all of it.
I know I said there'd be no overkill or oversaturation of Star Wars, but I mean, when you're looking at the other daily life tasks, a 3-hour movie a week, maybe a little much to put all into overnight. But we're going to make it happen. Somehow we will be getting our reaction videos out there. We're going to cover each of those 3 segments, one after the other. Speaking of what we're going to be doing in the future, our next episode, I believe we're going to be kind of reviewing what's announced at Star Wars Celebration, the biggest Star Wars conventions in every 4 or 5 years when they decide to kind of have them, is happening in Tokyo, Japan. I myself and Jen, my wife, are going to be traveling to be there on the ground level with everybody else in Star Wars Celebration. I'm really looking forward to it. I've been wanting to go to Japan forever, and this just seemed like the perfect excuse to travel to Japan, enjoy Japan for all its glory, and just kind of get some Star Wars in it. I lured my wife in by, hey, you want to go to Japan? Here's all this great stuff we can do. What? No, just go off of my mouth. No, but she's really excited about it. She wants to meet Rosario Dawson. She's been wanting to meet Rosario Dawson forever. She loves Ahsoka, so she's all in on it. It's going to be a lot of fun. Brian, anything coming from Star Wars Celebration that you're looking forward to specifically?
I feel like we've heard so many things about so many different movies over the last 5 years that have all gone into development hell. So I would like to hear about one of them, right? Like there's going to be a Taika Waititi movie / trilogy. There's going to be a Patty Jenkins movie / trilogy.
The
There's
Simon
going to be
Kinberg
like, yeah,
with Ryan Gosling. Do you think we'll see Ryan Gosling at Celebration?
I don't think we'll see it. I feel like that'd be hard to keep secret.
I don't know.
That he was flying to Tokyo. I feel like that would leak.
I would love to see Ken on the Star Wars Celebration stage, ready to go.
Yes. And I would love for some sort of news about Star Wars in the theme parks, right? At some future episode, we're going to talk about the Galactic Star Cruiser, which it sounds like for the near term is just going to be a bunch of offices. But I would just like to see what they have in mind, because they made a lot of promises a few years ago and they still haven't quite kept them.
Yeah, I know they have a panel for Star Wars Celebration, not Star Wars, in Star Wars Celebration, they have a panel for the parks and Star Wars in the parks. Depending on my schedule, I may try to jump into that. Of course, I'm going to try to get into the panels for all the big ones. You've got Mando and Grogu's having a panel. Of course, they're having an Andor panel. They're having an Ahsoka panel, which I'm very curious about. And that is going to be one of my goals to attempt to get into for the Ahsoka panel. Just to see, is it just a reflection on the previous season, which I believe it's going to be, and then moving forward into what we can expect in the second season. I think it's too early to see any footage from season 2 of Ahsoka. I definitely think we're going to get a Mando trailer for sure. It's coming on that time. So they're going to release that. I hope they release it to the public the same time we get to see it at Star Wars Celebration, because that's something that I feel they shouldn't water down. In the past, there's been a lot of those trailers that they show and everyone records them on their phone. So they're going to share it. So just release it. Just let the fans who are there watch it for the good time that it's released. And then an hour later, release it to the public. Like, give us our HD version of that Mando trailer. And yeah, that's about everything as far as Star Wars Celebration is going to go. I mean, just lots of merch, lots of goodies, lots of just Star Wars goodness. Like, I'm just fascinated to see how the Japanese culture embraces Star Wars and how they go all out. Like, cosplay is a big thing in conventions. I know that the Japanese culture is very in tune with pop culture and how they express those things. So I'm just really looking forward to seeing all the cosplay and all the different celebration antics that they have going on to celebrate that. So that is it for this episode. Brian, any final words of encouragement?
Fight the Empire.
Fight the Empire. Join the rebellion. That's Disney.
Did you know that it was originally not going to be Fight the Empire? It was going to be.
Oh, I do. Effort? And I think they made the right call. As far as
the sentiment is there. The sentiment is there either way.
So. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't make it more or less impactful with Fight the Empire. It kind of goes back to what we were saying about what is that line they want to cross as far as Red Wedding, or they just got into an argument and split up. There is that little line. But if anyone's going to make it happen, I think it's going to be tonygilroy, just because it is that serious tone that he's brought to this. And it is that story of just human passion and just, those struggles and how we kind of overcome that. And I feel like this is coming at the exact perfect time that a lot of people kind of need it nowadays. So I'm really looking forward to Andor 2. Really looking forward to Star Wars Celebration. I just want to thank everybody for watching these videos, listening to our audio version on these podcasts. Feel free to like and subscribe, follow all of our socials and all that good stuff. And we'll keep bringing you content as much as we can and as faithful as we can to ourselves and you guys. So thank you again for listening and watching and just being here with us to just talk about this thing that we love so much on so many different levels. And we are happy to be here with you guys sharing it. So thank you again and goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
This is Senator Mon Mothma. I've been called a traitor for speaking out against a corrupt galactic senate, a senate manipulated by the sinister tactics of the Emperor. For too long, I've watched the heavy hand of the Empire strangle our liberties, stifling our freedoms in the name of ensuring our safety. No longer, despite imperial threats, despite the Emperor himself, I have no fear as I take new action. For I'm not alone. Beginning today, we stand together as allies. I hereby resign from the Senate to fight for you, not from the distant halls of politics, but from the front lines. We will not rest until we bring an end to the Empire, until we restore our republic. Are you with me?
Look! They came! Look how many there are.
This, my friends, this is our rebellion.